Are they leaving? Are they staying? Bible reading? Ever praying? Will the church be ever graying? Don't you see why we are saying, are the kids alright?
Welcome to Are the Kids All Right, the latest sub-series from the Holy Post. Whether you're a parent, a youth pastor, a teacher, or a young person yourself, you've probably seen all of the headlines concerning Gen Z. Rates of depression and loneliness are surging, their relationship with technology is kind of troubling, and they are leaving the church in droves. We've talked about these trends a lot on the Holy Post, but we're not alone. 10 by 10 is a new collaborative discipleship initiative whose mission is to make faith matter more for this younger generation. You'll hear more about the great work they're doing later in the show, but we've partnered with 10 by 10 to create this series and to hear from experts in each episode about the challenges young people and those who care about them are facing. One of those experts is Jean Twenge, a professor of psychology at San Diego State University and an author with an expertise in generational differences and technology. She's known for her books iGen, Generation Me, and the Narcissism Epidemic, and she's argued that smartphones were the most likely cause behind the sudden increase in mental health issues among teens after 2012. I sat down with Jean to find out if the kids are going to be all right. Jean Twenge, welcome to the Holy Post. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So earlier this year, the Surgeon General released a report about the epidemic of loneliness that we're seeing in our country, and the report included a special warning about teenagers. I know that's been on your radar for a while, but what first got that on your radar? What first indicated to you that there was a problem with teenagers, especially in this area?
So I work with a lot of big national surveys of teens, and one of them goes all the way back to the 70s for high school seniors and back to the 90s for 8th graders and 10th graders. And it's done every year. And so as the data comes out year after year, it kind of gives me a picture of what's going on with teens. And in the data around 2012, 2013, 2014, more and more teens started to say that they felt lonely. More and more started to say that they felt left out. There was also some relatively new trends in how they were spending their socializing time. So around then, they started to spend a lot less time with their friends face to face, whether that's just hanging out or going to the movies or driving around in a car. Like all of those things went down for teens. So they're spending a lot less time with their friends in person, and they were a lot more likely to say that they felt lonely.
Now, there's been a ton written in recent years about the correlation between those trends you just mentioned and the rise of smartphone use. I think the smartphone, the Apple iPhone came out in 2007, but it didn't get widely used until a few years later. So I know you've spoken and written about this, and there's been some pushback. Why do you think it's controversial that you would connect some of these trends with smartphone use? Why are some people reluctant to admit that that is probably a significant factor here?
I'm not really sure. I'm not sure I even really understand the pushback other than that obviously a lot of people like using their phones. They like using social media. A lot of people spend a lot of hours on those two activities, both teens and adults. And I think sometimes there's that idea of like, but if I like it, and it's bad for me, then there's kind of a knee-jerk reaction against it. But I really am not exactly sure, because when you think about what changed in the lives of teens in the early 2010s, the fact that they started spending a lot more time online and a lot less time with each other face-to-face was by far the biggest change in their day-to-day lives. Nothing else even comes close. So for that reason, I think it really shouldn't be controversial to come to that conclusion that we're seeing these big changes in what teens are saying about how lonely they are and how they're feeling and whether they're depressed right around that time when the way they spent their time outside of school fundamentally changed.
Yeah, so you mentioned earlier the amount of time they hung out with their friends. That had been, from what I read, pretty steady since the 1970s. And you mentioned in the data that there was a little bit of a dip in 2004, and then post-2010, it just nosedived. and they were spending way less time in person with their friends without their parents. What gets lost when that activity disappears? What is it that we gain in those adolescent years from FaceTime with our literal FaceTime, not the app FaceTime, with our friends?
Well, you're spending time with friends in person. There's just a level of emotional closeness that develops that social media really can't touch. Part of that is just being with someone else in real time, that you're reacting to what the other person is saying. It also tends to be more one-on-one or maybe a small group rather than social media, where it's not just about friends, it's really a performance for a larger group. And there's the idea of likes and followers. It's just not the same. So electronic activities like FaceTime, which at least are in real time, you can see each other's faces, come a little bit closer than social media, but they still don't have that. You still don't have touch. You don't have being in the same room. You don't have doing shared activities together, which is one of the things that brings people closer. So there's a lot of things that are missing in that online communication. And I think that is an important point, because what a lot of people have said about the rise of social media and smartphones is, well, teens are just using those to communicate with their friends. They've always done that, so who cares? Well, because they're different. They're different, plus the link to mental health is different. Teens who spend a lot of time with their friends in person are less likely to be depressed. Those who spend more time on social media are more likely to be depressed.
Yeah, so and this gets into more data that you've talked about. Mental health since 2010 has seen a massive uptick in anxiety, depression, loneliness. But these aren't just symptoms that they're self-reporting. There's actual behavior and data that shows there's more visits to the emergency room for self-harm, attempted suicide, suicidal ideation. All these things they're not, I could see how self-reporting might be skewed, but when you're seeing the actual outcomes of that, there's no doubt this is a massive problem. I'm the parent of, well, 2 teenagers and 1 young adult now. And we've certainly seen this. What is it about social media in particular that you think might be driving these mental health challenges? I mean, one argument is, well, it's replacing in-person engagement, sure, but is there something inherent to social media that then drives these mental health problems beyond just the lack of incarnate connection?
So there's a number of other factors. So one is right at that same time, about 2012, teens also started to sleep less. So possibly because technology also interferes with sleep. A lot of teens stay up late or look at their phone in the middle of the night because it's obviously very compelling. So they're losing out on sleep. Sleep is crucial for mental health, so that's another possible mechanism. Then there's all of the direct things that tend to happen on social media, so social comparison. Everybody else's life looks much more glamorous online. There's specifically in that area, especially for girls, body image issues. So Facebook's own research looked into this and found that a lot of body image issues that teen girls and young women develop can be traced specifically to Instagram. So it's interesting that the biggest social media company in the country found themselves that there were these issues of social comparison and body image on Instagram, the platform they own.
So, and my understanding is the data shows this is not helpful to adults either. Like, we are all impacted in these negative ways by social media, but it has a disproportionate impact the younger someone is, for perhaps obvious reasons. You mentioned in your book that this generation, this younger generation, is living through what might be the most rapid uptake of a new technology in human history. Obviously, we've all seen new technologies unfold over history: radio, television, even the printing press, I suppose, if you go back far enough. But the uptake in social media and digital technology has been so quick, which makes me wonder, is it just the speed of the change? In other words, given enough time, will we acclimate to this technology and we'll see a return to normal levels of mental health challenges and anxiety and depression, because it just was rolled out too quickly and we haven't had time to acclimate yet? Or do you think this is a permanent feature of this technology that no matter how quickly it rolled out, we were all going to react the same we're going to have the same psychological challenges with what we're engaging today.
I think it's not just the speed of the rollout, it's also the specific things the specific issues that come up. So, smartphones are great. They can be used in many, many useful ways, but they also tend to interfere with social interaction. So everybody's had this experience. You're talking to somebody and someone else pulls out their phone.
Right.
And what do you think? You're not usually just because humans are insecure. Our minds don't go to, oh, they have to check whether their flight's on time, or maybe, they have to see if their kid texted them. No, we're like, wait, what did I just say that was so boring? What does this person have to do that's more important than me? So it interferes with that. And then, think about having those thoughts as an adult, and then imagine being 12 or 15. There's that issue. Then there's all of the ways that social media uses algorithms to keep people on the apps for longer, that it is almost completely unregulated. So it is pretty routine these days for 9, 10, 11-year-old kids to be on TikTok, sometimes even on Instagram, when the minimum age is supposed to be 13, but that's not enforced. So these platforms were designed for adults. They weren't designed for children. They weren't even designed for teenagers. Yet we haven't put the regulation in place to protect kids from this adult environment with adult pressures. And that's a problem.
So I want to get into some of the solutions you'd recommend in a little bit, but beyond the obvious and dramatic mental health challenges we all are concerned about, depression, anxiety, certainly suicide and suicidal ideation, apart from diagnosed severe mental health challenges, what are just the run-of-the-mill ordinary things that these technologies are disrupting from prior generations that weren't raised on them? Can you identify just the run-of-the-mill normal stuff that's just dramatically different about this generation compared to their parents and grandparents?
Yeah, that they just don't do things in the real world as much, that they're not with their friends in person. They're at home in their bedrooms scrolling through social media or texting. And, if they're doing that as a replacement because, their friend's out of town, that can be a benefit. But if it's replacing being with friends in person, that's what really stands out, is that just the way they're socializing is just completely different from previous generations. A lot of teens, their parents are Gen Xers. I'm a Gen Xer myself. I also have teenagers. Yep. And, just what all of us remember about what being in high school was like. It was hanging out with friends. I mean, that's what most people did. And that just doesn't happen as much for this generation.
But how much of that is, like any generation, us just projecting upon our kids the childhood we wish they had because we wanted it to be more like ours? And how much of it is genuinely a loss, a detriment that is objectively damaging for this generation? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, how much of it is just our perception? I mean, the answer to that's zero, because we're looking at surveys of teens, going back in time. But, the perception of whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, that becomes much more complicated. I mean, there's upsides to kids not going out of the house. They don't get into as much trouble. Gen Xers certainly got in plenty of trouble. So, you just look at crime rates, teenage pregnancy rates, all that was at record levels when Gen Xers were the teenagers. So, there's certainly some bad outcomes that can happen when teenagers are getting together in groups. But there's also some huge benefits. So there's trade-offs involved in any kind of system. I think the unfortunate thing is you could certainly have it that, sure, maybe teens got into a little bit of trouble, but they weren't taking it to the Gen X levels, but they were still getting together. I mean, if they just get together at each other's houses and interact face-to-face, that would be a big improvement over the way things are now.
Yeah, it's bizarre when I see a group of teenagers together, especially girls. I see this more often, but they'll be in a room together, but they're still all just looking on their phones rather than interacting with each other. And it's it's kind of scary. Getting back to the resistance to pegging these problems on the emergence of smartphones and social media, I've been kind of shocked at reading some of the alternative explanations that are coming from folks who are defending social media and smartphone usage. They're saying that the uptick in mental health challenges for this generation is rooted in a performance-obsessed culture, that there's more pressure than prior generations to look beautiful, achieve, be involved in a bazillion things. Others are saying it's the economy, the stress of the economy on households and families, school shootings.
Can we take these one by one?
Absolutely, because I mean, I'm not convinced by them, but I'd love to hear your expert reason for why they're not the right explanation. So let's begin with that one, performance-obsessed culture.
Okay. I mean, I think that one, that is taken to the next level by social media. So that one kind of interacts with the social media explanation. In terms of academic pressure, I don't think that holds water because the uptick in depression occurs both for high school students who are planning on going to college and those who don't plan on going to college. If you look over time in these same surveys, there has actually been a slight decline in the number of teens who say there's a lot of pressure to get good grades at their school and a lot of competition for good grades. There's, at least among 8th and 10th graders in particular, there's actually, again, been a decline in the number of hours that teens spend on homework. So this kind of academic pressure argument, at least for the US data, doesn't really fit. There's some support for it in some worldwide data that as academic pressure has gone up, so like self-perceived academic pressure, that, then that's happened over time. That may interact, though, with if you're anxious and depressed, you might feel more academic pressure, right? So there's an interaction. Just if you look at things that are more objective, like how much time people are spending on homework, there you don't tend to get that. But yeah, is there more pressure to be, to look a certain way and to be glamorous? Maybe. And if so, guess why? Because Instagram exists, right? So that's that one. That one I think has a little more truth to it than the others. The economy, no way. The economic trends were going in completely the opposite direction. 2012 was when the U.S. economy finally started to improve. Unemployment was going down, stock market was going up, everything in the economy was doing really well at the same time teen depression was going up. So that one doesn't fit at all. School shootings don't work either. For two reasons. First, if it's school shootings, you'd expect depression to start increasing in the late 90s when those started to happen more, and that's not how the data looks. An even bigger strike against that theory is the fact that the increases in loneliness and depression occur worldwide, even in countries that do not experience school shootings, and if they do, it's extremely rare compared to how often it happens in the U.S.
Yeah, and the last one I read about, which I don't mean to diminish the value of this challenge, but I kind of laughed when I heard it, was climate change. That there's so much rhetoric out there about the doom and gloom for the future of the climate that it's causing young people who have hypothetically the most to lose by not dealing with climate change a sense of existential dread for the future. Maybe in some small pockets that's the case, but I can't believe that that's an explanation for the broad rise in these challenges that we're seeing.
So I think there's a couple of reasons why climate change doesn't fit the data. So first, again, in these big surveys, concern for the environment peaked in the 90s, not recently. And there's been a lot of concern around the environment at various points. It's not just a recent thing. It's not something that started in 2012. There was there in the 90s. It was there in the mid-2000s with Al Gore's documentary An Inconvenient Truth. There were various points where it got a lot of attention. Yet, again, that's not the pattern of the data. Plus, if it were climate change, what you'd expect is the biggest increases in depression among teenagers, among the oldest teens. 17 and 18-year-olds, where they're probably the most aware of the news around that, the most concerned about it, the most informed. But nope, that's not how the data looks. You see the biggest changes among the youngest teens. So self-harm, for example, the biggest increases are among 10 to 14-year-olds.
Yeah, and I don't know too many 10 to 14-year-olds that are consumed with anxiety over the state of the environment.
Exactly. That's right. So I think that's part of it. The other thing, too, is, okay, if the world has a big problem, there's a number of ways that you can react to that. And the usual reaction, especially from young people, is not depression. It's agency and let's do something about it. The young people during World War II weren't depressed most of the time, even though you could certainly think about, well, that's a huge problem. But that wasn't the reaction. The reaction was, let's solve this. Let's fight. Let's have victory gardens. Let's work in the factories.
Okay, so when I talk to parents, whether my peers or parents of younger kids, when I talk to youth pastors and youth leaders, not to diminish the value of your data, which is incredibly important, but I don't think you have to convince any of them that this is the issue, right? They experience it, they know it, the data just confirms what they've experienced. But a lot of them feel powerless to do anything about it. And do we have a collective action problem here where one household, one family, even one school choosing to do something isn't enough because everyone else is still engaged in it and you're that one family or that one kid that's not engaging the phone, and so we're all trapped in this reality? Is there a solution beyond a collective action solution?
Well, so yes and no. I do think that some individual actions can have an impact. However, you're absolutely right. We need group level collective solutions for this.
So let's
very
start
clearly.
Let's go from the top down. Let's start at the broadest possible level, a national or industry-wide change in policy. What do you think would be most effective at that level?
No social media until you're 16 and age is actually verified and enforced.
There's been some pediatric studies that have tried to say that as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, and Utah and a couple other states have passed that. It hasn't gone into effect yet, but that is gaining traction.
And what are the greatest barriers for that actually becoming law?
Congress doing anything?
Sadly, right? But why not? Why wouldn't a Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, why wouldn't these companies self-regulate rather than have the threat of government regulation? Why won't
profit? They make enormous amounts of money off of young children and teens. And they like to say that, oh, we're trying to get kids off, who are 12 and under off the platform. You're not doing a very good job of it.
This feels like the early years of the tobacco industry being called to task for the way they were marketing their product and knowing that it was addictive, and Joe Camel and those other campaigns that were targeting kids, because they knew if we get young people addicted to this at an early age, they'll be our customers for life. Feels a little bit like that's what's going on here, is these companies know if we get 10 and 12, 14-year-olds hooked on social media, we have them forever, and we don't want to lose that young introduction of this very intoxicating, addictive product.
Well, and young kids do not have as much ability as an adult do to put that phone down, to close that app. And I want to be clear. I think the analogy to cigarettes can only go so far, because there are some contexts and in some ways that social media can be beneficial.
Sure.
It's just for younger kids and not as much. And to excess, definitely not. And cigarettes a little harder to make the argument for any benefit.
Right. Okay, stepping aside from the industry or government level of intervention, although we can hope that happens, what can schools or communities or even congregations enact, or what recommendations would you give on that level?
So for schools, no cell phones, no smartphones, bell to bell. So sure, kids need them before and after school for communication, for pickups and transportation and so on. But really, they don't need them during the school day. They're a distraction in the classroom, and they keep kids from talking to each other at lunch.
Are you seeing more schools and districts adopt that policy?
I don't know of any nationwide data that's kept track of that.
When my oldest was going into middle school, I remember sitting for the curriculum night where you go to each of the classes and interact with the teachers and hear what the kids are going to learn. And I was kind of horrified at how many of the classrooms the kids were encouraged to bring their phones and use them for a calculator or for research, for whatever they were doing. And it really bugged me. And to the point where even the kids maybe from lower income homes who didn't have a phone or a device, the school would provide one in the form of an iPad or some other kind of connected tablet. And even then, this is, I don't know how many years ago now, my oldest is 21, but it seemed to backfire on the school, and they had all kinds of issues and behavioral problems with these devices. But even now, it's still widely just accepted. This is part of youth culture now in our country, in the schools, rather than drawing a line and saying, we're not going to do this, it's an impediment to good education and socialization, they keep doing it. And what I'm hearing from some educators and administrators is the ones who don't want these phones in the school is it's the parents who are insisting on their
I've
kids
heard
having
that too.
that they want constant contact with their kids. And even
Yep.
fears like school shootings and things like that mean I don't want to ever be out of touch with my kid, even though we all grew up at a time where we didn't have constant contact with our parents and somehow we survived.
Right.
So what do you say to the parents who want that tethered to their children 24/7?
Think about your kid's education and your kid developing social skills. And is it more important to text them and ask what they want for dinner, or is it more important for them to focus in class?
I don't know how much interaction you have with congregations and churches, but it's obviously not primarily an educational based community. It's a spiritual community that's doing a different kind of education. What would you instruct those communities? What benefit can they bring to this generation amidst all of this craziness with these devices?
I mean, one thing is when you get teens together for a youth group or whatever activity you're doing, to just take a break from the phone. Put them all, in backpacks and zip them up, or have a bin where you put them all for short periods of time. So it's interesting, when I talk to teens, they all say, I don't want the phone taken away. Like, they don't want it taken away for long periods of time. Makes sense. That's, how they keep in touch with their friends and so on. But taking a break when you're doing face-to-face social interaction has some appeal to them, because they have that one period of time when they're not under that pressure. And then they know their friends or folks in the youth group are not going to be taking out the phone when they're talking to them. It makes social interaction easier, at least in the long run, if they don't have that fear that somebody's going to take that phone out.
So when my kids have all been involved in different ministries or camps at times, and when they go off to these camps, they're not allowed their phones for sometimes a week at a time. My son this week is actually going to head out to do some mountain hiking with one of these groups, and he won't have his phone for 10 days. And I've been surprised that they look on those moments as refreshing.
Yes.
Because they don't have the pressure to constantly keep up with their apps and whatever they're doing. And they connect much more deeply with one another because that social interaction is more genuine and undistracted. And yet, when I talk to people who are working with teenagers or ministry leaders that are trying to engage teenagers, their attitude is often, well, if we don't use these devices, if we don't engage them, then we seem out of touch. New kids don't want to come. They feel like we are antiquated and not on top of things, and so they want to use social media to engage with these kids all the time. And it's hard to convince them that no, it might be a higher threshold, but once you get past it, they actually enjoy the interaction without the devices more.
They do.
But getting there is so hard.
I mean, it doesn't have to be hard. It can be just, we're going to do this for 15 minutes, or we're going to do it for half an hour. Just start out that way, and then see how that conversation becomes more natural and closer. And then, and teens are more open to this than you would think. I think a lot of adults assume that teens are going to hate that, and they don't. And they do welcome it very often.
Okay, then at the last level, we've talked, government and industry, schools, communities, churches. What about households, families? What kind of practices do you recommend there from the parents or whoever's responsible for these kids in modeling a healthier relationship with these devices?
So one is no phones in the bedroom overnight, and that's for both adults and for kids. Lots of studies show how much having the phone in the bedroom interferes with sleep, and then it's just not there as a temptation. Then you carve out that amount of time away from the phone to get healthy sleep. So, put the phone on a charging station outside the bedrooms or downstairs or wherever it's convenient to do so. And then the second is put off getting your kid a smartphone for as long as possible.
Gosh,
So
that's
if you-
getting harder.
It's not, though, because there's alternatives. You can get your kid a flip phone. You can get him a Gab phone that's a pared down smartphone. So you can have the ability to contact them without having to give them a full-blown smartphone where they can download social media and do all kinds of other stuff.
But that's that collective action problem again. And we did that with a number of our kids delayed we were one of the last families, I think, to get one for our kids. But the challenge became not that we wanted contact with them. There were other devices they could engage. It was everyone in the social group communicates through name the app, and I don't have it. So I feel like an outsider, and it creates that stigma.
Yeah. I haven't run into that with my 3 kids, at least not yet. There've been, I really think that sports teams and groups need to stop using social media to communicate that way. It's not a good, healthy choice. I mean, let's do a group text. What's wrong with that?
Yeah, great point. Last question. We've talked about the data and all the trend lines, which are kind of terrifying. Is there anything that gives you hope right now as you look at the research? Do you see is the turn coming? Are there trends early perhaps that are giving you hope that maybe we've learned and unfortunately have experimented on this generation to figure it out? But what evidence do you see that gives you hope?
I draw a lot of hope from the young adults who are taking action on this issue. There's been a number who have founded organizations to speak up for young people around limits on technology. I think that's fantastic, and that's where we're going to get progress. And there's a lot of things in this generation that I think are very hopeful and are very encouraging. There's been an uptick in the number of teens and college students who say that they want a job where they can help other people, where they think, that as a life goal, helping other people is important. I think that bodes very well for the future. But we really have to solve this problem of social media, particularly for the youngest and most vulnerable.
Well, Dr. Jean Twenge, thank you so much for your time today, for this conversation, for the excellent research and writing you've done over the years. You've got a number of books that I've read over the years. Your latest, remind everybody, is Generations, the Real Difference Between Gen Z, Millennials, Gen X, Boomers, and Silence, and What They Mean for America's Future. Anybody who's working with younger generations and trying to understand them, especially the dynamic between these young folks and older generations, has to get this book. It's just full of so much wisdom and great research. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right.
This episode is sponsored by 10 by 10. More than 1 million young people in the U.S. are walking away from the church every year, but it doesn't have to be this way. 10 by 10 is a diverse group of Christ followers from different cultures, ethnicities, and traditions. 100 organizations working together to address this concerning trend. 10 by 10 has 4 priorities: to make youth discipleship a top focus for U.S. ministry leaders, to elevate leaders of color and their organizations and networks to reflect the diversity of the body of Christ in the world today, to curate, create, and share resources and training to equip local leaders to reach the next generation, and to connect and mobilize partner organizations to collectively impact 100,000 diverse faith communities nationwide. Learn more about 10 by 10 by going to the website 10by10.org. That's TENX10.org. TENX10.org to empower you to help faith matter more to the next generation. And thanks to 10 by 10 for sponsoring this episode.
Hey everyone, it's Skye. I am here with my Holy Post co-host, Phil Vischer. Hi, Phil.
Woohoo! Hi, that's me.
And beaming in all the way from California is our friend, Kara Powell from the Fuller Youth Institute and 10 by 10. Hi, Kara.
Hey, it's great to be with you both.
Woohoo!
So
hi, that's Kara.
We are debriefing my conversation with Dr. Jean Twenge about technology and Gen Z. And I want to begin with something she said sort of in the middle of the interview, where we were talking about how the statistics have changed dramatically since Gen X was high school age. And she said it was a trade-off because I'm a Gen Xer. You guys are both Gen Xers too.
I am too, yes.
I am.
Okay.
I guess I'm on the old side of Gen X. I'm almost, my sister's my sister is 2 years older and she's officially boomer, and I'm 2 years younger and I'm Gen X. So I'm on the old side.
And I'm on the tail end of Gen X. But she said crime was higher among Gen Xers when they were in high school. Sexual activity was higher. Teen pregnancies were higher. All that's way down with Gen Z.
Yeah, we were
on the
nuts.
flip side,
weren't we nuts? I mean, Kara, how many Piggly Wigglies did you knock off during high school? I think I did 3 or 4.
We didn't have those in Southern California, Phil. I'm sorry. I don't know what those are. No,
Okay.
sorry.
It's a southern grocery store. I didn't have them either. I grew up in Iowa. I'm just being ridiculous. But I'm supposed to let Skye drive, so I'm going to be quiet now.
So on the flip side, Gen Z, though, has higher rates of mental health challenges. They're not socialized nearly as much. They're not making certain markers of adulthood or young adulthood at the same rate that our generation did. So, Kara, let me start with you. When it comes to technology, we talked about a lot of the negative stuff, but what do you see as some of the trade-offs that might be more positive that this generation has access to and that we who are trying to lead and guide them have access to because of technology?
Yeah, I thought the interview with Jean really pointed out some of the risks and liabilities of technology. And I know Jean feels this way also. I think it's great to put that hand in hand with some of the ways that technology is an asset. I mean, really simply, like I couldn't have this conversation with you and people couldn't be listening to it if it wasn't for technology. But even thinking more specifically, say, about young people, because that's what we're focusing on, technology really builds young people's sense of purpose. There's some really encouraging data, actually, that something like 68% of young people say that they feel supported by others through technology, through texting, through the apps they have, et cetera. And especially during the pandemic, when young people were locked down in most states across the US and unable to be in person with others, technology became a bridge or maybe even a lifeline. So I absolutely agree with Jean that we need rules, we need parameters, we need to be wise and really steward it well. And I think there are some great gifts that technology offers.
So if technology is a way for younger people to get encouragement, to maintain relationship, it seems like the challenge then is how do we utilize this for its good uses while mitigating against its clearly negative impact as well.
Yeah.
Do you guys have any examples of either families or communities or churches that you think are figuring out what that navigation looks like?
Yeah, I thought Jean did a wonderful job thinking about how we need rules, how, from bell to bell, as she put it. It would be great if phones weren't accessible to young people and other ways that we need regulations, actually honor the existing regulations in most social media platforms that one's not supposed to use it until one turns 13. What I would love to see paired with that set of rules is a strong emphasis on relationships. And Skye and Phil, we've talked about this enough for you to know that we are so passionate about adults building relationships with young people. In fact, somebody asked me recently, Kara, if you had to summarize all the Fuller Youth Institute research on youth discipleship, what would it be in one sentence? And I said something like, discipleship boils down to caring, Jesus-centered adults investing in young people. And so technology is a way for us to have stronger, closer, ongoing relationships with young people. But also we can even talk about technology and have that be something where those discussions fuel our relationships. Even the interview you did with Jean, I listened to it with my 20-year-old, and I did that on purpose. One, because I wanted to get her perspective, but number two, I wanted us to be able to have a great conversation about it. And so we were driving along together, and periodically I would stop the interview, or she would stop the interview, because she wanted to say something, or I wanted to ask a question. And even listening and thinking about technology together was something that brought our relationship closer. So I would say for folks who are listening, man, start with that interview with Jean and play it with a young person when you're in the car and see how you can even have a relationship that explores these questions about technology.
I'm curious, Kara, did your 20-year-old say anything in response to that interview that surprised you that she wouldn't mind you sharing with us?
Well, I did ask her permission to share this, Phil,
Okay.
so I will go ahead and share this. She agreed with much of what Jean said, and she disagreed with a fair degree of what Jean said. And I thought what was especially interesting is, and she's someone who's pretty astute about social media. She's studying it in college, actually, in her communications major. And she said that she helped me understand that there's a shift now, even in social media, where it's not about looking together all the time. It's about being authentic and showing your struggles, showing your flaws, literally showing your flaws. So, she was describing social media influencers who are now on purpose, especially females, removing their makeup and being on camera so that they are seeing, warts, zits, and all, as a way to, quote, be more authentic. Now, I think that's probably more positive than looking like you have it all together all the time. I think there's questions about, with whom are we our most authentic selves, that I'm not sure it's the nearest social media platform. But that was interesting, not really surprising, but interesting, just thinking about how it's not only about looking like you have it all together, but also sharing, gosh, I feel like I suck at this, and that's actually connecting with young people more these days.
It does make you wonder about, the power of this medium to create a sense of false intimacy. And an extreme version of that would obviously be pornography. But even that, sharing one's struggles and flaws and taking off the makeup, we can call that authenticity. We could also call it false intimacy, because you feel like you're connecting them with people without the actual fully dimensional, incarnate human relationship that Jean was talking about is so essential for our development.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, and Skye, you and I have had discussions about this offline. I think that false intimacy can certainly happen in person, embodied relationships too. It's certainly probably easier to slip into that and fake it until you make it a little bit more on screen or on your phone or on your nearest device. But I think we have to be aware of that in person too.
So Phil, let me ask you a question, because you're an innovator in Christian media for kids going back to the 90s.
Oh, yeah.
No.
Right? Yes. You've seen this transform over the last 30 plus years. What's different today than back in the 90s as far as using media for discipleship or using media for the spiritual nurturing of kids or teenagers?
Well, in the 90s, there was no AI Jesus we could talk to. So that's a big one.
A big plus?
That's a big change. That's a change. Now, kids can just talk to Jesus. Just on the right app. You can, I think what's the most different is the, kind of democratization and popularization of media communication. So like when I started, the only real, widespread, impactful kids media was coming from James Dobson. So James Dobson, if a conservative Christian kid was interacting with media, 8 times out of 10, they were getting James Dobson's worldview and what the folks on the family ministry wanted them to learn. And then VHS decks, and then DVD players, and then the internet, and then social media. And now, when kids are interacting with media, they could be interacting with another 12-year-old in Beijing or a 48-year-old in Manila, or, you have no idea who your kid's interacting with. So there's been a huge multiplication of even the amount of spiritual content, just little weird things from little weird churches, who knows where, that show up online or on, Facebook or on TikTok, influencers that are Christian influencers that are doing things on TikTok and getting views all over the place. And then you've got the whole crowdfunding thing with The Chosen and things like The Chosen that are trying to be The Chosen, that are spreading around the whole world without any gatekeepers, no theological gatekeeper, no Tyndale House Board of Theology review. It's just guys with an internet connection, and guys and girls with an internet connection. So there's a Wild Westness to children's media today, where my 6-year-old granddaughter, when she was 4, I'd say, all right, here's YouTube Kids. This is a nice video, perfectly acceptable, wheels on the bus, go. And it's YouTube Kids, so it's designed to only kid-flagged content can go onto it. But within 3 videos, she's singing Wheels on the Bus in Russian. And I'm like, what just happened? And she's watching Russian cartoons and not quite understanding why she can't quite understand them. So it's become such a wild west of randomness that there's just no ability to put it back in the bottle where a James Dobson or a Billy Graham or Christianity Today or the Southern Baptist Convention could say, this is what we will feed to the children. It's just all of our kids are at a Las Vegas buffet, and we've lost control.
That's a wonderful image, Phil. Thank you. But it reinforces what Kara was saying earlier, that the importance of pairing these technologies with relationship. And whereas we as parents or youth workers could have outsourced some of that responsibility to those trusted big ministry, media voices, denominational sources, whatever, that intermediate doesn't exist anymore in this digital world. So we now need to be much more aware of curating that content or the apps or devices that these young people, whether 4 or 14, are engaging in, which frankly, as a parent, feels exhausting to me. And I'm sure that's true of people in ministry roles as well. Kara, as you talk to youth pastors and people in churches, what are they telling you, or what are they asking for that would help them disciple in a digital environment better?
Yeah. Well, that's part of what we're trying to provide when it comes to 10 by 10, which is a national initiative focused on youth discipleship. Is what leaders are telling us they need turnkey proven tools. And so again, in the spirit of how do we surround every young person with a small team of adults, we've created online training, completely free, completely accessible, for any leader, especially youth leaders, who want to go deeper with the young people they care about most. And, I'll tell you what, leaders are just like all of us. We don't have time to guess. We don't have time for suboptimal approaches to discipleship. We really want our time with young people to count, because they don't have much time either. And so, instead of seeing young people at church 4 times a month, we're seeing young people at church once or twice a month. And so everything that we do with them really needs to count. And that's what we've geared these training resources to be, is to really help adults accompany young people. I love that verb, accompany, that our Catholic friends use so well. Help adults accompany young people, especially as they're asking these identity, belonging, and purpose questions.
Well, along those lines, in the show notes to this episode, I'm sure there'll be links to some of those resources that 10 by 10 is making available, as well as links to Jean Twenge's books and her most recent book that we talked about in the interview. Thank you both for kind of joining me to debrief that conversation more, and hopefully you guys will be back with some other debriefs later on in this series.
Would be happy to.
I'm always around. You know where to find me.
I do know where to find you, Phil. Thanks, everyone.
The Holy Post podcast is a production of Holy Post Media. Production assistance by Mike Strelo. Editing by Area Code Audio. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by subscribing to Holy Post Plus at holypost.com/plus. Also, be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary, plus ukulele and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, Holy Post merchandise, and much more.